Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great week 6. Um, I still have some essay ones and some exam ones left to grade. Hope to have those graded as we move along. I have graded some on both the exam and both on the essay. So you should start seeing the grade pretty soon. Last week, I did send out the first checkpoint grades to the college. So again, if you're passing, meaning you got a 70 or higher, you probably didn't get any phone calls or emails or anything like that. If you got a D or lower, which would be 69 to 0, then you might have got a phone call, email, especially if you're dual enrollment. You probably should have had a conversation maybe with your high school coordinator at some point, or will be in the coming days. The next checkpoint will be at midterm, which would be about week 8 or week 9, and that's really where you want to be conscientious about your grades because at that point there's only about 7 more weeks left in the semester. And when we do the final checkpoint, which would be after all the grades are submitted, that will be your official grade for the semester, and that will be the one that goes on your official transcript. So just kind of keep in mind the deadlines. I know COVID's going out there still, the flu, strep. There's a lot of different things going on, but try to keep abreast of the deadlines. Don't rack up as many zeros because the zeros really is what's going to wreck your grade the most. So make sure that you're turning stuff in on time. Anything's better than a zero, even if it may not be your best work, but it's better than a 35 is bad. Yes, it's still failing, but it's not a zero. Will a 35 bring your grade down? It will, but not as bad as a zero will. So sort of keep that in mind. Um, Probably in the next couple weeks, I'm going to get some information about how you can get some extra credit. Um, it will evolve around some library orientation stuff. There's going to be a pre-test and a post-test. I will give you the links. Once you complete those links, it's going to send me verification that you did both the pre-test and the post-test. Each one of those are going to be worth about 5 points a piece, and I will probably put it on either one of your lowest exams or essay grades moving forward. So be looking out in your email for those. The other thing that I will give as extra credit as we move along would be the student evaluation deal, and I will talk a little bit more about that as it gets closer. That will probably happen more or less going into spring break or maybe right after spring break. And then I'm going to also give you a chance to drop one of your weekly grades. That means like a weekly writing or a weekly quiz. It's not a major essay or a major exam, meaning if you didn't do too well on essay one, you can't drop that one. But you can drop maybe the week 1 assignment if you didn't do so well on that. Um, if you know which one at this point, because I mean, we still have, I mean, this is week 6. So we still have, about 9 or 8 weeks left. We have about 9 weeks left, I guess. Um, So we're going to have some more weekly assignment type deals due. But if you already want me to drop one of those now, I can only drop one. So once I drop whatever one that you want me to drop, I can't go back and drop another one, or I can't go back and say, let's say that you wanted me to drop something in week 12 instead of week 3. I mean, once you give me the go ahead to drop one, I'm just going to drop it and we're going to move on from that. I will probably need to know that as we get closer to the end of April, if nothing else. If you don't tell me by the time we get closer to when grades are due, final grades are due, I'm just going to go in and drop one for you, which one I think would benefit your grade the most. Um, Speaking of midterm, there's information in your syllabus about the Respondus. I think there's stuff online. Let me see if I can pull this over and I will share this here with you. we can go about looking at one of the poems for this week. I will try to get another lecture video up for the other poem, but I'm trying to get grades caught up in all of my classes. So if you look, this is the modular 6 or the week 6. There's some readings in here in your textbook. There's pages to your textbook. These are actually taking some supplemental reading material. If this is the first time, this shouldn't be your first time dealing with poetry. You probably didn't do a lot of it in 1101 because that particular class wasn't really, set up to do poems and short stories and all that stuff. But in middle school and high school and even in elementary school, you probably dealt with some poetry at some point. But if you need a refresher on some of the poetic terms that we're going to use that you're probably going to hear today, I would definitely click on these hyperlinks and I would look in your e-text pages from 5 through 13. I would definitely go through some of these videos because they sort of add a little bit more, give or take, than what I would add. They give you sort of a full round material and information on not only the poet, but the poem that we are discussing and looking at for the particular week that we're in. So there's some biography information about Hughes and Maya Angelou. I will probably have to try to come back and make a video on Maya Angelou, but I think what I'm going to do today, dealing with Hughes, they kind of do here in this particular video with Maya Angelou. So you can kind of go back and hopefully watch that before this week assignment is due. So if you look, we do have an assignment due this week. Also, be mindful, citing poetry in MLA is a lot different than citing short stories or prose like you did in Essay 1. So you want to go through and look how to cite poetry correctly, how to do the works cited page, that type deal, because again, you don't want to lose really easy points for stuff that has already been up here that you can kind of go back and refer to and look at. That will help you not only in this week's assignment, but it will also help you in the poetry essay that's going to be due later in the month. And if you, that's probably you're going to see those topics in week 7. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. If you look, there is a study guide for the Respondus for the poetry. So if you click on that, and I'm going to go ahead because I already have mine brought up. I'm going to show you how that looks. So the midterm exam is going to be a poetry exam, and it's only going to cover the poems from week 6, 7, and 8. So we usually do about 2 poems a week. So, the math there is about 6 poems. So you will see a question, at least one per poem. So that's right there, 6 questions. Now, the actual test, because it is Respondus, it's a timed test. You only have 60 minutes once you click start. It's not a gotcha test, but it will cause some heartache. It will lower the grade if you're not prepared for it and don't study for it. So that's why I gave you this study guide to sort of use as you read the poems for this week, next week, and week 8. So if you are finished sort of with reading the poems for this week, I would go ahead maybe and start reading the poems for week 7 and week 8 so you can get ahead a little bit. Also have a, maybe a good mind of what you might want to write about as it relates to the essay, poetry essay that's going to come up later in the month. But if you can go through and, analyze and study this study guide and be able to answer these questions, then you should be able to do that Respondus test without any major issues, because the Respondus test is going to be a multiple choice style test. So if you're able to answer these questions, if you're able to, take your own notes and analyze these poems, I'm going to show you how you go through and really squeeze out of the Hughes poem here momentarily. If you can do all that, then you shouldn't have any problems with the actual midterm exam. Now, again, I'm going to show you where you can find some of this information about the respondent. You're going to have to, if this is your first time doing an online course, then you're going to have to go through and get the Respondus app. There's information about that, in your syllabus. There's some information on Blackboard. I will show you where you can find all that. You're going to have to download the right Respondus program to your device, being a laptop or a desktop. Tablets don't work too well. I wouldn't even, entertain that. And definitely I wouldn't download it to a cell phone because that's not going to work for you too well either. But it's one of those things that you're going to have a working microphone or working camera and stable internet to be able to complete the test. And of course, have the Respondus program on your laptop or desktop. If you do not have those items, then you're not going to be able to take the exam. If you need, if you don't have like a web mic or a webcam, or your internet is unstable depending on how the weather is that day, then you're going to need to take the exam at your closest Coastal Pines Technical College. Either at the testing center or the library. You can use, the computers and the equipment that we have there. You're still going to have that Respondus app. But you can use the computer's equipment if you don't have a webcam or a web mic, or your internet can cut off, depending on which direction the wind is blowing that day. The other thing is, if you decide to take it from your own home and your own device, make sure that all your updates on your computer have completed, because nothing's more heartbreaking than when you start the test and you're about 45 minutes in and all of a sudden you got an update and it shuts down your computer. Well, guess what? Once it shuts down, you're locked out of that test. So if you didn't save anything or whatever the case may be, I mean, it's just going to send it as a blank test, which is automatically going to be a 0. If you did save something, I could still grade what you have. But the problem with Respondus is I can't go back and reset, restart, do-overs. I can't do that because the college pays a good bit amount per student. And there's a lot of online students taking online classes that have to take Respondus. So this is a one-time shot test. So I wouldn't click begin and start until you're 100% sure you can sit through for at least an hour and answer all the questions and submit it without having any interruptions or disruptions. The other thing is, if you do take it from your house, make sure that you're in a quiet area, because you do have a proctor watching you. I may pop in, depending on if there's time, to see how things are going. You won't know that I'm there. You're not going to know that the proctor's there, but everything is being recorded. That's why you need to have your web mic on and your webcam on. If you don't have your camera on, if I can't see you, I'm not going to grade your exam, because you're going against college policy about having response. You're just going to get a 0, and I'm going to move on to the next person. So you need to make sure that your web mic, webcam is turned on for the duration of that exam. You need to have a college ID or a driver's license, something that has your picture and your full name on it. Because before you can even start the test, you're going to have to take a picture of yourself currently, and they're going to have to see identification through the driver's license, the college ID, to see if the face, the picture, and the name all matches up. If you don't have those items, you need to find a way to get them before taking that exam. Otherwise, you're not even going to get to the exam. Let me see, because we're going to talk a little bit more about this coming up in a couple weeks. If it asks for a password, you did something wrong on your end, meaning you downloaded the wrong Respondus browser app to the wrong device. Meaning, if you're using Google Chrome, you need to download the version for Google Chrome. If you're using MacBook, you need to download the version for that. You can't mix match the versions. That's why it pops up that password question. And don't bother asking me what the password is because I don't know it. I don't create the password. It's the program. If you download everything, you do everything right on your end, it's going to bypass the password. It's going to take you right into the test where you're going to have to take your picture and all that stuff. So make sure if it's asking for a password, don't email me, what's the password for the exam? Because I don't have it. I don't know it. I don't make it up. Um, you're going to have to go back and, see what's going on your end as it relates to your downloading of that particular app. If you have any issues with the Respondus deal, you're going to have to contact their technical response team. There's a email, phone number, and all that stuff on that particular platform once you get on. Because I can't help you. Only thing I can do with Respondus is upload the test and then download your answers and grade it. I have no control over what goes on their end of their program. Just like I have no control of what goes on your side of it when it deals with your computers, your equipment, your internet. That's why I say if you think you're going to have issues because you got outdated stuff, you may want to go to the closest Coastal Pines Technical College. And you probably want to go between Monday and Thursday of that week between 7:30 and 6 because the colleges are closed on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and you're not going to be able to get in to anything until, and I mean, if you don't get in before Thursday, I guess, and you can't take it at home, then you're going to be just out of luck because the exam's going to be due that week. And we're going to check to see exactly when the date is. I think it's on your syllabus, but we will double check that. Just make sure that you have everything up and running and ready to work. You can't have any notes on this thing. You can't have any text. You can't have any cheat sheets. That's the whole deal with the video. They're probably going to have you take your camera and go around the whole room and your desk and everything to see what's going on. Don't have a lot of people in your testing environment, especially at home. If you're taking it in your own personal room, don't have a bunch of people running in and out, or don't have a bunch of noise in the background, radio, TV, cell phones going off. Don't have a bunch of stuff, hanging on your wall because the proctor will look at that and sometimes they will flag it for possible breach of the test. And if they flag too many of them, they just shut your test down and it give you a 0, right? Because they're going to consider you cheating. I will look at these flags. If I think there's cheating going on, then I have the video proof. We just give you the 0 and I'll move on to the next student. So just be careful about how you approach this and take this test as it relates to your testing environment. All right. So going back, all right, this is that study guide. If you're able to answer this and go through this and take your own notes, then the actual midterm exam shouldn't be too terribly difficult. You're probably going to have anywhere from 6 to maybe 10 questions on the exam. Again, they're going to be multiple choice. I'm going to give you an example from the Hughes piece that we're going to look at here momentarily. But if we go back, I think if you go up here to a welcome start, you should see some stuff. Here's the Respondus browser or monitor. You're probably going to want to click on that. There's going to be a video here that you probably want to go ahead and look at if you haven't.
As I'm in the midst of
a we may come back to it, look at it during
applying for residency right now.
But I just want to show you where that is. And then there's information about downloading for a Chromebook, for Windows, for Macs. And if you need some help with Respondus, there's some information right here. Again, there's tutor.com right here. You can upload your essays and that type of stuff there if you want additional feedback. Of course, your textbook, your MLA 9 handbook, additional information about Blackboard Ultra if you need help still navigating Ultra. But let me see exactly, going to our syllabus, when I have this midterm. I have it scheduled for the 9th. So let's see what day that is. The 9th of March. So that'll be a Sunday. So if you look, um, week, we're basically week 6 now. Week 7's next week. Week 8 starts on March 2nd, which is a Sunday, and it goes through the 9th. So midterm week is basically for us the 2nd through the 9th. So you will have up until March 9th, which would be that Sunday, to complete the Respondus event. And I will get everything. There's nothing up there right now that's really ready. Um, so I wouldn't try to, because I think there might be maybe, let me double check. I don't think there's anything. There's that study guide again. I don't think there's an actual test up just yet. So I will be grading that particular multiple choice test as we move along. But it will cover the poetry week 6, week 7, week 8. So make sure that you are keeping up with the readings for each week, especially leading up until the midterm, because you don't want to have any surprises. So if you look at this particular I2, and I'm going to bring over some notes and stuff, how I approach this and how you can approach these poems too, taking your own notes. So what we're going to do, because I'm going to assume that you've probably looked at some of the videos about the biography, and maybe you already looked at some of the videos um, on the actual poem. I'm going to let us listen to it, and then we're going to come back and kind of analyze it.
I Too by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.
Okay. Very powerful piece. Still relevant today with a lot of stuff going on. So when we look at this particular deal here, this is sort of my notes, how I approached it. This is a particular question, right? I'm going to go ahead and give you the question. This would be how a question would look on your midterm. It'd be multiple choice, right? A, B, C, D. So the question is, how does Langston Hughes use the metaphor of the kitchen and the table to explore themes of exclusion and quality in I2? And again, we have these answer choices, right? We're not going to answer it just right away. We're going to come back and answer it. But let's look at our answer choices. We have A, the kitchen represents the speaker's contentment with being alone, while the table symbolizes his desire for solitude. B, the kitchen represents exclusion and oppression, while the table symbolizes future inclusion and equality. C, the kitchen symbolizes the speaker's rejection of American values, while the table represents his refusal to be part of society, or D, the kitchen and table symbolize the speaker's acceptance of his place in society. So your quiz, your midterm exam will have a question about a particular poem, either from, week 6, 7, or 8. It's going to give you 4 choices. 3 are going to be wrong, and 1's going to be the correct one. So there's going to be no gimmicks and no tricks, meaning you can circle, say that B and D are right. It's only going to be 1 letter per question, unless the instructions tell you otherwise. So we'll come back to this particular question and give you the answer. But as we discuss this question, as you read it, as you look at the answer choices, think as we go through this what you might think the answer will be. And then when we come back at the end and give you the answer, hopefully you would get the right one. So historical and social context of this particular poem, right? Written during the Harlem Renaissance, which if you did any kind of African American history or U.S. history, you probably know a good bit about the Harlem Renaissance. A lot of writers and artists and musicians came out of that particular time period. If you need to sort of brush up on that, definitely check out some YouTube videos to give you a little bit of additional information. I too reflects the struggles and aspirations of Black Americans in the early 20th century. It speaks to segregation and racism, but also embodies a hopeful vision of integration and equality. Some of the theme and meaning behind the poem is a response to the exclusion and oppression of Black Americans. Yet it asserts their rightful place in the nation's identity. Hughes uses the metaphor of a segregated meal setting to symbolize racial injustice. That's where the table is starting to come in, right? Table in the kitchen. We have this symbolism and refrain. So at the beginning in line 1, and also at the very last line in 18, we have I too sing America, which emphasizes the speaker's rightful inclusion in the American identity. The repetition reinforces a strong message. Black Americans are an integral part of the nation's fabric, and their voices cannot be ignored. We obviously still see that, right? We see that in R&B music. We see that in hip hop and rap. We see that in movies. We see that in poetry. We see that in books. We see that in television shows. We see that, even the president of the United States, right? At one time, we had a Black American president, Barack Obama. We could have also had the first Black woman president with Harris, but, that didn't happen this time around. Poetic style and structure. This particular poem is free verse. The poem lacks a consistent rhyme scheme or meter, which reflects the speaker's demand for freedom and equality, mirroring the broader struggle to civil rights. Hughes also uses short declarative lines. He uses brief, powerful lines to convey his message clearly and strongly. The simplicity of the structure reinforces the accessibility and directness of the poem's meaning. As it relates to the poem's rhyme and rhythm, there's really no formal rhyme scheme. The poem does not follow a traditional rhyme pattern, but some internal repetition and rhythm create a musical quality. And it also has natural cadence. The poem follows a conversational rhythm, almost like spoken word or a personal declaration. So we get to the poem, and I know different versions won't have line numbers. To me, I always like to try to find line numbers. If not, I go ahead and kind of put line numbers. It makes it easier to go back when we are dissecting the text, as you will, and it'd be very helpful when it comes to citing stuff. Because if you have a poem right? Especially for this week, you're looking at 2 poems that you're going to have to do a writing on. But looking toward the end of March, where your second essay is going to be due, you want to maybe make up your own or create your own line numbers with your poems to make it easier for the reader to see what you're citing. So that's what I did here. I did line 1, and then I counted down to line 5 and counted down to line 8. So you probably want to do that on your own end unless you can find a version of the particular poem online that already has line numbers for you. So when we look, I have some stuff here. We've already had listened to the poem. I'm looking at some poetic devices and terms that you probably should have heard at some point. One is called an amphora. It's a repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of the lines, and we see that this happens in line 1, right? I too sing America. With line 4, when company comes, we see that when company comes again in line 10. And also at the very end, of course, we talked about some of these refrains. I too am America at the end here on line 18. Now, metaphor. Metaphor is a big literary term that you see not just in poetry. You see it in music, you see it in movies, you see it in short stories, you see it in dramas. A lot of what the writing for week 6 has to deal with, or modular 6 has to deal with, is this term metaphor, extended metaphor. So when we look at the metaphor here, right, we see one in line 2. I am the darker brother, which in this case, that particular metaphor represents Black Americans as a part of the national family through historically treated as lesser, right? We know about the history. The civil rights, Civil War. Look at some of these different things that have happened throughout American history. Line 3, right? This is that symbolism we get about the kitchen. They sent me to eat in the kitchen, right? The kitchen here symbolizes segregation and exclusion from full participation in society. When we get to lines 8 and 9, we see the table metaphor come in, right? Where it says, tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. The table represents equality and belonging, right? The difference between the kitchen, right? Because the kitchen is out of view, out of sight, right? Out of mind. The table is out out from the kitchen where everybody can see, where everybody seems to be equal because everybody comes to the table. Nobody really eats, in the kitchen. They eat at a table usually. If we look, lines 3 and 4 again, going back, they sent me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. Again, we see that this particular area of the poem, systemic racism, where Black Americans were historically marginalized and denied a seat at the metaphorical table of American society. This also shows that the speaker, right? We assume the speaker is Hughes. Be careful though sometimes when we say poet or writer or speaker, sometimes the speaker is the poet, is the writer, but sometimes the speaker is somebody different as well. So kind of keep that in mind. We assumed here, though, Hughes and the speaker are one and the same. So this shows that the speaker is being separated from the rest of society, specifically from the shared experience of eating at the table. The act of being sent away implies discrimination and exclusion. But then we get with lines 5 through 7, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. In these particular lines, we see that the speaker does not succumb to bitterness. Instead, he grows stronger, suggesting resilience and hope for future equality. Despite being excluded, the speaker, Hughes here, does not accept defeat. Instead, he grows stronger, hinting at a future where he will claim his rightful place. So he's thinking he's got a little bit more of an optimistic outlook at this point. So yeah, you can kind of exclude me now. You can send me to the kitchen, but I will still eat well, and I will sort of have the last laugh. Is what he's getting at. When we get to line 8, basically lines 8 through 10, we start to see this shift in tone, right? Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. So within these lines, 8 through 10, we begin to see that tone and shift. For here, the shift suggests an inevitable change in society where equality will be realized. And we have started to see, especially after the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, a lot of that stuff. I mean, yes, we still probably have, a good bit of work to do on both sides, but we have came a long way since those days, since the days that Hughes was writing. Things have changed and hopefully changed for the better. Um, in terms of workplace relations, in terms of financial situations, in terms of college education situations. Hopefully, things have turned and went the right way more so than the wrong. Now, we see these things in the news. In the past, especially 2020, of cops, choking out, um, possibly killing African Americans, whatever the case may be, which, all of that, you know, is wrong, um, in the way it was being depicted. But we have to kind of keep in mind too, sometimes these things on video, they can be distorted. So you have to be careful what you're watching. Is it 100% true? Could it be, um, doctored up some? You want to get your own truth. You want to get your own facts before really jumping in and making, assumptions on stuff that you may not even know about because you're not necessarily participant or a spectator of what's going on. But generally, usually the camera does not lie, especially when you think about 1991, March of 1991, with the not the Martin Luther King, but that it happened it caused the LA riots, um, where you had about 10 or 11 police officers. Rodney King, that's his name. I was 11 years old when I first viewed that on CNN, and that was just really, it was mind-boggling because that was before smartphones, and really before anything. You had your basic VC, like video camera, um, and that's how it was captured. 2 o'clock in the morning, an African American gets pulled over. Of course, I think he was under the influence, right? He had drugs and alcohol. But the way they treated that man, they didn't need to go to that extreme with, 10, 15 people just beating him with a nightstick and stuff. He almost died. And, had that person or had that spectator didn't have the video going at the time, we probably wouldn't have really known about Rodney King. Um, but I mean, if you don't know about Rodney King, you might want to go back and kind of look at some old CNN footage, on YouTube because it's there. I think they've had movies. About a year later, they had the LA riots because the jury didn't find the officers, who were primarily white, guilty of any wrongdoing, and of course that caused all hell to go down in LA for about a week. You know, the burning of stores, beating up people, and killing people. It just caused a lot of chaos. Um, if we look at some additional poetic devices and terms, we have this word called enjambment, where there's a continuation of a sentence beyond a line break. So you see that a lot. You see that here, starting with "Nobody dare say to me, eat in the kitchen." Then it just seems like the sentence just sort of kind of keeps going. The poem flows naturally without rigid punctuation, creating a sense of movement and progress. Again, he's wanting to have this sense of movement and progress because he's feeling optimistic that African Americans will have a seat at the table. It may not happen right at that minute that he's writing this, but tomorrow will always be a better day, or tomorrow will be that hope for them. And it has become tomorrow, right? We elected our first African American president in history with Barack Obama. So tomorrow has sort of happened for African Americans. Um, that's the highest status in the land here, is be president of the United States. Symbolism is throughout this poem. America itself is symbolic. The poem critiques it. Exclusionary history, but ultimately um, claims it as a shared identity. The act of eating and growing strong suggests endurance, perseverance, and the inevitable rise of marginalized voices, um, which is really what he's getting at with this message in this poem. This also implies a shift in power when we look at sort of these last lines here. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. So these lines that have this shift in power, where those who once oppressed the speaker will no longer be able to do so. It shows the exclusion will no longer be tolerated. So he's not going to take it anymore. And he shouldn't, right? Nobody should be treated less than, equal. Uh, we also get, with lines 15 through 17, the suggestion that once the speaker is fully recognized and included, those who discriminated against him will feel guilty about their past actions. And we start to see some of that in today's society. Maybe not as much as some of us would hope for or like to see, but we start to see it. Sometimes it's quiet. You read about it in passing or something of that nature. Some other poetic devices and terms: imagery. The contrast between being sent to the kitchen and sitting at the table creates a strong visual representation of racial segregation versus future inclusions. I mean, when you think about, the whole situation about sitting on the bus, there was issues with that. African Americans and white Americans at one point had to go to two separate schools. They had to drink from two separate water fountains. It was just some really silly stuff. And we've grown up in a time that 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, that when we're taught that, or when we read about that or learn about that, some of us are just shocked to saying, "You mean that really actually happened?" Because we're so used to being sort of segregated now at work, at sporting events, at school, church, that just knowing that there were separate bathrooms and separate restaurants and separate water fountains and separate this, which is really kind of a mind-boggling thing if you grew up in the 80s, 90s, and even today, because we can't see that happening. So we shouldn't have to revert back to the past. Hopefully we can be like Hughes and keep moving forward, for better change for everybody, not just for African Americans, but for all people. Um, Lines 16 through 17 is where Hughes believes that one day those who's excluded and oppressed will recognize the beauty, worth, and humanity of Black Americans and feel remorseful for their past actions. So he's really speaking to those that have suppressed him, who wronged him maybe, and he's hoping that as time moves on, as it becomes another tomorrow, that things would look up, would be more optimistic for African Americans and for those that have treated him and his group poorly would feel remorseful about how they were treated. All right, so going back to that question, how does Langston Hughes use the metaphor of the kitchen and the table to explore themes of exclusion, inequality, and I too? Now, what I did was going through analyzing, squeezing this poem out. I was basically going over how to derive your answer from these choices. And letter A just doesn't make sense. Um, we know that he's alone, and he's not looking at the table as a symbol for desire or solitude. He wants to be part of a bigger community where everybody's sort of a part of that community. So A wouldn't be the choice I would choose. Let's look at B. The kitchen represents an exclusion and opposition, while the table symbolizes the future, inclusion, and equality. Now, that sounds pretty good. So I would be probably, highlighting that. Let's see. I would probably put like a little, so let me write here. I would probably put like a little circle or something around this one right now. But definitely I'd cross out A because that's not going to be helpful. Let's look at C though, because I mean, again, C or D, one of those could be a better answer choices than B, but right now I'm thinking it could be B. Um, C, the kitchen symbolizes the speaker's rejection of Americans' values, while the table represents his refusal to be part of society. No, he wants to be part of society. He wants to get back to the table. He wants his values, not in the kitchen. He wants to be out here in the table. That's where the American values really um, are. So C would be another one. Cross out. D, the kitchen and table symbolizes the speaker's acceptance of his place in society. No, I mean, because one and the other is something different, right? The table represents acceptance in society. They both don't. So in that case, D is gone. So B is your better choice, and B is that correct answer. So that's what you would have there with your answer in this case would be B. And I based that based on what we looked at throughout here when I was doing my own annotating the poem, so to speak. So you want to get to the point where you're annotating stuff. You're taking your own notes. You're analyzing the stuff that you're reading. One, that will make it easier to go back, if you, instead of maybe reading the poem 1,000 times, if you annotate it really well and have notes on it and analyze it to the point where you can kind of read it, you can kind of just go back and use that sort of as like your cliff note type deal, without having to reread it 1,000 times, especially if you annotate it really well. You could have done the same thing, and hopefully you were with your short stories. You want to start annotating text as we move along here, especially as we get into the month of April and we're start talking about drama and you got that big research paper. You're going to want to start annotating what you're reading, so you can have your own notes. Come back and study your own notes. Have your sort of own opinion on things, right? You're not just regurgitating what you read on Spark Notes or Lit Charts, which is another thing. You want to be careful about reading those. Those are good. If you're trying to, get through a complicated text, by all means, read them, see what they say. But again, it's just one person's opinion over somebody else's, meaning they may not be 100% correct, even though they may say, hey, we're written by Harvard students, or by Yale professors. Again, it's sort of an opinion there. Generally, they're pretty good as it relates to summarizing chapters and summarizing big parts, but I would definitely not use them to cite in essays. They're not really scholarly or critically acclaimed enough, right? I mean, you can't find them on Galileo or a database. Then I probably wouldn't want to cite from them, quote from them in essays to back up my points. So I usually cringe every time I look at a works cited page and I see, about three or four citations for Spark Notes or Cliff Notes or Lit Charts or whatever the newest study guide deal is online. Yes, like I said, they're good to go. If you read the poem or read the text and you still don't understand it, then go back and kind of get a little bit more understanding of it. But as it relates as secondary sources, don't use those as secondary sources, um, because it's just sometimes the analysis from them is not necessarily spot on to where it needs to be as you would find it in a journal from Galileo or a book from Galileo that from an actual expert or a professor who specializes in that particular area of literature. A lot what you're getting for Spark Notes and Cliff Notes are just grad students trying to make a buck, so they're getting in something that they like to do, um, but they don't necessarily analyze it as deeply as maybe they should, as you would find, like I said, as you would find in an actual academic journal article. All right. So if you look at the other video, the Maya Angelou video, it kind of goes through and does what I did here. Um, so I would definitely look at that to kind of help you. And as we get closer to week 7, I have another sort of exercise where I pick a poem and I give you sort of like a study, a multiple choice question that will resemble one from the actual exam. And again, if you can go through this study guide and, annotate your poems and that type of stuff, you really shouldn't have any problems, because it is going to be just like I was showing you earlier with this, right? Give you a question, A, B, C, D. There's only one answer. Um, Hopefully that won't be a tricky situation for you. I mean, obviously it will if you don't study for it, prepare for it, read the material, analyze, annotate your own text. Um, but if you have any questions or concerns about the Respondus exam, please email me before the 9th. Um, Obviously, within the next couple weeks, I'm going to go ahead and have the test ready. And I may open it up a couple days, prior to week 8. So you have a little bit of extra time if you want to go ahead and kind of take it early, you can. Um, Otherwise, I hope everybody else has a great rest of your Tuesday, a great rest of week 6, and be on the outlook for grades for your essay 1 and your exam 1. If you haven't received them yet, you will get them directly. I just have a lot of essays and stuff right now piling on me. So it's the life of the English teacher, the English professor, right? Is reading grade, reading grade. So again, stay warm, stay dry. It's supposed to be raining really hard and bad tomorrow, I guess, and then getting cooler a little bit. Otherwise, I will talk to you probably next week. Stay safe.